Good morning, everybody. You can see we have a couple of additional members of the panel today. I'm Kieran, I'm the Director of Rising Global Peace Forum. This session, Love Like Jo, is going to reflect on the life and the work of a very special person, a brilliant humanitarian, a parliamentarian, and a champion of people and very good causes around the world. Just before we go into today, just to mention, last night, obviously, we had the awarding of the inaugural Rising Global Peace Prize, which, for those of you that don't know, was awarded jointly both to Jo Cox for her work across many different issues, and also to the Syria Civil Defence, also known as the White Helmets. And I'm very happy that today we have the Deputy Director of the White Helmets, who's travelled from Syria to be with us, Munir Mustafa, and we're especially grateful for you making the journey here today. Also joining me on the panel are two people who knew Jo very well. I had the good fortune of meeting Jo on several occasions, and as a campaigner myself, she was the gold standard, the person that you aimed to be like. And I was bowled over by her every time I met her, and particularly the work that she did. But I'd like to introduce two people who knew her well. Martlew met Jo about a decade ago when they were both working at Oxfam, and Alison McGovern MP met Jo in 2010 and worked together closely in Parliament. So welcome to you both. The first question I'd just like to ask really was, what was Jo like as a person, as a campaigner? If I'll ask you, Nick.
Sure. Soon after she was elected, I went to see her in Westminster and talk about Syria. And given that Jo was so inspirational in getting my organisation off the ground, and then to be working with her in a new chapter as she became an MP, there was kind of the new beginning that Jo was bringing there. A new beginning also to parliamentary life, to challenging Parliament and government what this country can do for the people being bombed and starved in Syria. And we kind of bounced ideas around, and she always used to say, let's do it. She was relentless. She was sort of restless in trying to sort of challenge what everyone was doing, get everyone out of a kind of stupor at the scale of the challenge you're dealing with. It's just relentless. We will aim higher. We will achieve more. And that energy was just contagious. So I feel stronger, better, more aiming higher for the people we're serving, because I had the privilege of working with Jo.
Ali?
I think that's really true. When a new group of members of Parliament is elected, there's always a kind of surge of energy, because they bring with them new ambitions and they make the House of Commons their own. Jo was like that times a million. You know, I first met Jo when she was campaigning with Sarah Brown on maternal mortality, and when she joined us in the House of Commons, she was like a breath of fresh air. And two ways in particular. Having opposed Andrew Mitchell as Secretary of State for Defence and me as an opposition MP, to see Jo reach out to him, our political enemy, to see her reach out to him on Syria and say, never mind all of that Labour-Tory business, that's all, of yesterday. What matters now is Syria, and he can be our ally on Syria. Several of us, had a sharp intake of breath and then realised she knew what she was doing. And the other way that Jo was just like a breath of fresh air was the way that she brought her experience as a campaigner into politics, into political life. So for all of us who decide not just to kind of protest, not just to march, to hold a placard, to sign a petition, but to want to seek power, it's a big decision. But she brought her campaigning attitude to Parliament, and she never accepted that we couldn't get our issues on the table there, that we just had to accept what the government told us was important. So she was in the Commons every day, making sure that Syria was on the agenda, you know, we would not have talked about it so much without Jo. And the last time I was in the Commons with Jo, just to give an example of how she worked, was when we were questioning the Defence Secretary on Syria. And I can remember like it was yesterday, having my question ready in my head and just leaning back and seeing that Jo was there. And on Syria, Jo always led. Jo always went first. And leaning back and her catching my eye and her just mouthing across to me, what are you asking about? What are you going on? And me saying to her, war crimes, and her saying to me, I'm going on the strategy. And us having that kind of almost unheard by anyone else in the House of Commons, that exchange that meant we were like that, we were a team. And Jo brought that sense of building a team of campaigners to us in the House of Commons. Politics can be a horrible business where even when you're on the same side, you know, you're fighting each other for attention. And Jo just swept that away and made us a team.
And Jo was a real trailblazer for that. I mean, for a first-term MP in her first year, to adopt as many international campaigns and things that she felt strongly on her entire life in her first year was actually a brave move, considering all the pressures on a new MP, as you'll know, Ali, and all of those pressures she came in. But that making a team...
I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying that Margaret Thatcher did not make her maiden speech, her first speech, until she'd been a Member of Parliament for a year.
Wow.
And in the time it took Margaret Thatcher to make her first speech, think about what Jo did.
And in Jo's maiden speech, of course, she made the point how there is far more that unites us and we have far more in common than that which divides us. And you've mentioned how she did that in-house, if you like, domestically within the Labour family. She was one of the people who said it's important that we get Jeremy Corbyn on the ballot, and she didn't disagree with him, but she felt that it was something that was a debate that was worth having. She did that in the party, she did that with Andrew Mitchell, and she was very much around bringing people around the table, because everyone I've spoken to about Jo, it is that sense of more in common. She always saw what she had in common with someone and not the difference. And I feel that since Brexit in particular, and you see that the political climate at the moment is becoming more and more divisive, it's something that we need more MPs in particular, more politicians to embrace. How do you feel they can do that? How can politicians follow Jo's lead in this particularly divisive climate?
Well, there is, in politics, there is always an incentive to exploit fear. You can always get marginal gain by pointing to the enemy and saying, I'm on your side, let's fight them. It's much harder to say, look, all of us share something. How do we build up from that point rather than just face our enemy? In the end, that's the only answer. You know, in the end, the returns on exploiting fear diminish over time, and Jo was the perfect example of somebody who always went for the high road. She always looked for not the lowest common denominator, but the greatest magnitude of people who could support her causes. We all have to be a bit more like her.
Yeah. And you've mentioned, of course, Syria as one of the main campaigns and one of the most famous ones she was known for, something that had been very precious to Jo as a campaigning topic long before she was ever a Member of Parliament. I will bring in Munir in a moment on that particular point, but earlier in the year, Jo wrote a letter to the committee of the Nobel Peace Prize and campaigned, as she always did, to have the Syrian White Helmets win it this year. And there's often an understanding you can't lobby the Nobel Peace Prize. It's this impregnable force. And indeed, they made a different decision this year, but that didn't stop Jo. As in every other way of her campaigning, it didn't stop her. And we're very fortunate now to have the Deputy Director of the White Helmets with us. Munir, what did Jo's campaigning for you mean to the White Helmets?
هلا أول شيء بدنا نحكي إنه جو كانت من أفضل المحبين للسلام في هذا العالم.
First of all, I want to say that Jo was the best one who loved the peace in the world.
وكانت دائما تقف بجانب الشعوب المظلومة
And she
وجانب
always-
الناس المظلومين.
And she always stand by the people who need help.
وهذا الأمر كان يعني لنا الكثير.
And this meant a lot for us.
طبعا دعمتنا جو سياسيا للشعب السوري المظلوم اللي على مرأى ومسمع كل دول العالم ما يحدث داخل الأراضي السورية.
And Jo supported us politically as Syrian people, everyone is watching them every day dying in Syria.
طبعا الدعم كان في البداية هو دعم للشعب السوري كافة.
First of all, she was supporting the whole Syrian people.
ثم كان جزء من هذا الدعم مخصص للوايت هيلمتس.
And then a part of this support was to the white helmets.
طبعا كان دعمه للوايت هيلمتس هو دعم سياسي ودعم للترشيح لنيل جائزة نوبل للسلام ودعم اقتصادي أيضا.
Her support was political, and her big support was to make us win the Nobel Prize for Peace, and then it was also some another support for the white helmet.
طبعا ساهم هذا الدعم برفع المعاناة عن الشعب السوري لأن الدفاع المدني كان أحد دعاة السلام داخل الحرب في سوريا.
Her support helped us a lot because we are one of the organizations that we are calling for peace in Syria.
بقدر ما نحن سعيدين أننا نلنا اليوم جائزة مشاطرة مع جو.
We are very happy that we had this award with Jo.
بقدر ما نحن تعيسين أننا فقدنا هذا الرمز للسلام.
And we are very sad that we lost her because she was a symbol of peace.
And loss is something, of course, that everyone in the white helmets will be familiar with, the dangers that you face. And it's significant that we meet here today in Coventry Cathedral. We've just had the 76th anniversary of the bombing of the old cathedral. And the really significant thing for me as a Coventrian and many people who know Coventry's history was that the destruction to the morale of the building behind us in 1940 really took the energy out of people until the next day when people put their hands to the still smouldering rubble and started moving it out the way. And the really significant thing about having Munir here is that the White Helmets have been living that night of the 14th of November 1940 every morning, every afternoon, every evening for over 5 years, for even longer than the Second World War lasted, to put it into context. And the loss that is felt for us in losing Jo is that standard bearer. And the loss, the huge humanitarian loss there, I think makes it all the more significant that you're here, and we're very grateful for that. You have lost in particular a great political champion. Do you have a message to political leaders in the UK in how they can follow in Jo's footsteps?
طبعا أنا يعني رسالتي باتجاه السياسيين في بريطانيا وفي كل دول العالم هي على الشكل التالي.
My message is not only for British politics, it is for all the politics in the world.
جو كانت رمز للسلام.
Jo was a symbol of peace.
أتمنى من كل سياسيين بريطانيا والعالم أن يكونوا رمزا للسلام مثل جو.
And I wish that all the British political and all the world political to be symbol of the peace.
وأن يكونوا مدافعين عن المظلومين كما كانت جو.
And to defend the people who are in need like Jo did.
And if I can turn to Nick and Ali again, we hear much about Jo's her mischievous nature as well, and the tremendous sense of humour that she had. She's been described as a fireball and incredibly energetic. I wonder if you could share some of those memories with us.
I mean, it's the times when Jo would have an idea and get on the phone and something not long before she died, and so that the kind of the angelic creature on a pedestal that she can see, also kind of quite colourful language would come across because and I think that's what's brought that she was willing to show that she felt something. This wasn't an academic exercise. This wasn't a stuffy political Westminster exercise. This was people's lives that were at risk, people facing far tougher choices than we will ever face. Whether to stay living under bombardment or to cross over a dangerous sea, whether to fight oppression or to give it up for your own safety. She knew that there were people taking far tougher choices than she was having to make, and so she would get angry about it, and she would get angry that other people were resisting, not for good reason, but just for inertia and indifference. And so it's not necessarily a cheeky side, but certainly a fiery side that would come across, and then she would reach out. And she was this connector in Parliament and beyond, like making allies and putting like the electric surge through us all. And this thing, like aid got into 16 areas in Syria this year, largely because of Jo's inspiration. That she just put this current through all of us, and so people got food, people got medical assistance because of this electric energy that she put through all of us.
Alison, of your memories?
I mean, quite just before Jo died was the annual House of Commons versus House of Lords tug of war. And I don't know if people have seen the photo of Jo standing at the front of the House of Commons women's tug of war team. Now, for those who are not familiar with tug of war, this is a very silly sport that is a kind of, I don't know if they have tug of war elsewhere in the world, but anyway, it's basically you have a big rope and teams of people hold either end of the rope, and you have to like basically pull until you pull the opposite team and they all fall over. And it's kind of a fun thing that's done, but often taken slightly more seriously than it really deserves. Anyway, Macmillan Cancer Nurses charity every year organises a great summer party where there is a tug of war between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, between the elected House and the unelected House of Parliament. And I have pulled in the tug of war team every year since I was elected, apart from last year where I couldn't do it. And Jo stood in and joined the tug of war team at the last minute. Now, I am quite large. I'm quite well qualified to pull in a tug of war team, and Jo was beautifully petite and uniquely unqualified to be heaving in the House of Commons women's tug of war team. But she approached that rope like she approached everything else in life, which was with a kind of ludicrous over-enthusiasm. And to see the photos of her on that day always make me smile. She was great fun.
She was. Thank you for sharing that with us, Ali. And obviously, Jo was a campaigner long before she went into Parliament and was an unstoppable campaigning force with some four-letter words maybe thrown in for good measure. She was also a very proud Yorkshire lass and would talk to anyone. I think the first conversation we probably had was about that, actually.
That's all Yorkshire people are like that.
Yeah. That's probably a fair, I think that's a fair comment. I'm sure if there are any Yorkshire folk in there, they'll probably let us know.
Yeah.
You've been heavily involved in campaigning in international development as long as Jo has, Ali, and you've been a leading figure for international development in Parliament. The key issues we have here, Jo is very associated with Syria and the campaigning. What were the other global issues? You mentioned maternal health, the things that really stirred Jo.
Oh, Darfur. In fact, there's an incredible photograph, actually, of Jo with David Cameron and Andrew Mitchell and Michael Ashcroft and leading Conservative figures, and her taking them to Darfur to meet the victims of the violence and conflict there. She was a great champion of women, and that came across in all of the work that she did on global peace and international development. She also was a huge champion of British women being involved in politics too, and she was the first elected chair of Labour Women's Network, which is the organisation that empowers women in Labour politics in Britain. And she was somebody who, when she got up in the House of Commons to speak on a global issue, on a development issue, the place would fall silent, which for those people who don't regularly watch the House of Commons, it's like a schoolroom. We're all there kind of shouting at each other and pointing and whatever. So when Jo got up in the Commons, the place would just go quiet and everybody would listen and pay attention. And that's rare, especially in a new MP. So whether it was the Middle East or Africa, Jo spoke with real authority.
And I think that's a reflection of the grace that she showed to the people, particularly people that she disagreed with, and the way in which she, like you say, at Prime Minister's questions, there's always this pressure, isn't there, on particularly new MPs to ask these questions that have been framed beforehand by the party hacks and deliver the most stinging question to the Prime Minister. And I was always struck when Jo had the opportunity to ask a question at something as high profile as that. She didn't just go for the jugular for the sake of it. There was always a reason why she was doing it, and she would set out the reason rather than doing it for the sake of doing it. And certainly since Jo's death, the political discourse has become more frayed and has become more difficult in the UK, and a lot of that has muddied the waters and taken the concentration off of a lot of the work that Jo's doing internationally and a lot of the causes that mattered. What can we do to put that back on track?
Ask more of politicians. Ask them to be better than that.
And hold them to account.
At the end of the day, democracy works because my employers are the people who elected me. And we all have a responsibility in a democracy to require our politicians to be like Jo and to be better than they are. That's the job for each and every person in this room and each and every one of us. Politicians are human beings. They respond to what they're asked to do by the people they represent. So everyone in this room can make politics better.
After Jo was killed, this Facebook group emerged, simply called Jo, and it was made up of people, largely ex-fam people who had worked with her around the world, who just came together in this group to kind of mourn and remember, but also to mobilise. And so through that group, we've got 1,500 parliamentarians from around the world to commit to reject the politics of hate that had taken her life. And for 1,500 parliamentarians committed to that. Now, it's fine to make a commitment to it, but as Ali said, we all have a responsibility actually to own that ourselves. It's not just of our elected representatives, it's of ourselves. How can we create the platforms? Are we talking with people we disagree with? And talking with them in a calm way, trying to understand their views. And that works in Yorkshire, where I'm from, where Jo's from. It works when we're talking across in Syria and wider in the Middle East and other conflicts where people are just refusing to hear a view that's opposing to their own and refusing to try and understand where another person's perspective. And that's bridge building. It's not quite an extreme example of Jo working with Andrew Mitchell, but of reaching across the parliamentary divide and finding that common ground.
People do underestimate that, though. People do underestimate that. I spent 5 years having a go at Andrew Mitchell. Jo turns up in Parliament, makes a partnership with him, and gets more done in 6 months than I'd done in 5 years. If that's not a lesson, I don't know what is.
And if I can ask, what... We've spoken about Jo as a campaigner, as a politician, as somebody who cared very much about issues. You both knew Jo personally, so if I can for a moment and take your time, what did Jo mean to you as a person? Nick?
She was a mum of 2 amazing kids, and the husband to Brendan, and the love on that little boat that they lived on, it's still there. It's still there. And in the courage that those three are still showing, I really don't know how they do it, but just that shows like the joy that they shared. And so when I was working at Save the Children with Brendan, and Jo would come in with the kids, and just the joy that would kind of trail through the office, and it was that's something that fire doesn't go out.
I think that's true. We have to remember that the people who influence us, who change us, stay with us. So Jo may not be here now, but she is here in us, and we will endeavour to be a bit more like her.
And on that note, what is it, if you could have a message for everybody here today and for everybody who will be watching this afterwards, what can those people do to be more like Jo?
Give their money to the White Helmets.
Great. And if I can, we'll have a link on our
I'm
website.
only just beginning. Yeah. So support the White Helmets. Back the cause of peace and civilian protection in Syria. These are crucial imperatives. And if people can do one thing for Jo, it's that. But then there's a whole range of her causes that the Jo Cox Foundation is supporting, backing, promoting. We can all be a part of that.
And the Jo Cox Foundation have a page on GoFundMe. So just to plug that, if you get the opportunity to go to that, the funds from that will be split between Hope Not Hate, between the British Heart Foundation and, of course, Keeley with the White Helmets as well. So please do visit that later. Nick, what is it that people here can do to be more like Jo?
There's a thing that like love like Jo that can go in. It can seem very broad, but also very practical in the sense that Jo did have enormous empathy, which was essentially global empathy, but also she was ruthless about the things that she could contribute to, things that she could make a difference to. And I think what I try and take from that is where I feel like the silent pull of what I love, or the silent pull of the change I want to make, then following that and seeking those fellow travellers, as Jo did, seeking those people who can help me be more powerful, help me make that change. So making those connections and reaching out to people that you may not agree with on other issues. And that's how we can all make a much bigger change than any of us can on our own.
And Munir, what would you like to see people here do in order to follow Jo's legacy?
هلا في البداية بدي أتكلم عن جو ماذا تعني لنا.
I want to talk about Jo and what she means to us.
جو تعني لنا الحياة.
Jo means life for us.
لأنها ساهمت بإنقاذ عدد كبير من الناس ومنح الحياة لعدد كبير من الناس.
Because she helped in saving a lot of people.
وأنا أتمنى من كافة الشعوب حول العالم بالأجمع.
And I wish that all the people around the world
أن يمارسوا الضغط على السياسيين حتى يكونوا مثل جو.
to put pressure on all the politicals in their countries to be like Jo.
حتى يساهموا بإنقاذ ما يمكن إنقاذه من شعوب العالم المظلومة.
And so they can help to save the people who are having sorrow all the world, in all the world.
فقدان جو يعني تعاسة كبيرة لنا كدفاع مدني سوري.
Losing Jo was really sad for us as White Helmets.
ونتمنى يعني من كافة السياسيين في هذا العالم أن ينحوا المنحى التي ناحت به جو ويسلكوا الطريق التي سلكته جو.
And we hope that all the political to walk in the same path that Jo walked in and worked in.
And that's a really good point, actually, because recently the Prime Minister, Theresa May, had made a comment in a major speech at their party conference saying that if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. And that was a sentiment that I know Brendan came out publicly very, very strongly against, as did a lot of people. The Syrian White Helmets are obviously a huge focus for Jo and for everyone on this stage and many other people here and beyond. the people who campaign for Syria, people who care, do consider themselves to be citizens of the world. We're in a country that recently voted to leave the European Union, and just as a matter of fact, there was a narrow lead there where the country decided to look more inward than outward. And in this city in particular, actually, the city voted, the majority of people, to leave the European Union. But I think that's all too often taken as an indicator that just because people voted for Brexit means that they don't care about the world beyond their borders. And I don't think that's true. And I know that one of the things that Jo was working on until the day that she died was about trying to bring people in and make them care about the world beyond their borders. You don't have to brand yourself as a citizen of the world. You just have to have that common humanity in you to want to do better. The message that I think we've got here today is one of pushing our politicians and expecting and demanding more from them to be more at Jo's level, whether that's through a tug of war or through tireless and fearless, expletive-laden campaigning. But also it's about staying true to the causes that you believe in and pushing. And I think everyone here has tremendous respect for Brendan and for Kim and the rest of the family for the work that they're doing to establish the new Jo Cox Foundation, to continue that support. If I can, just in these final moments, if I can ask for one other memory of Jo, what was your most cherished memory of Jo, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us? Nick?
I mean, it's probably a Yorkshire one. It's just finding in Jo, equally when she's just become an MP, and we're talking about grand issues of Syria and various issues of foreign policy, but she was down the road from me. I'm from West Yorkshire. She's from just a bit further west in Yorkshire, and the fact that she would take the time, despite taking on all these responsibilities, and she would still be happy to just like reminisce about the Pennines and walks and yomps in the hills and just you actually felt I felt sort of special and privileged and connected with her as fellow Yorkshire people, but just as someone who would look you in the eye and care about what you had to say.
Her sense of humour will stay with me forever. You know, she had a pretty devilish sense of humour and a beautiful, beautiful smile that, you know, she could light up a room from 20 paces, and that will stay with me forever.
And Munir, if you have a message for the people here from the White Helmets, from Syria, to the people who want to live out Jo's legacy. We've heard that we're encouraging people to donate to the page, but is there something more people have to do to persuade their politicians to be more supportive?
هلا بكل دولة من دول العالم وبكل شعب موجود من شعوب العالم بس نطلب منه إنه يمارس ضغوط على هؤلاء السياسيين حتى يكونوا مثل جو.
We ask all the people, not only here, it is in all the world, to push and put pressure on the political to do more and more for Syrian.
وأنا تعيس جدا إنه بحياة جو يعني لم أستطع أن أقابله بشكل مباشر كشخص
I'm
يعني.
very sad because I didn't meet Jo personally.
ولكن أنا أشعر بفضل عمل جو على الدفاع المدني وعلى الشعب السوري بشكل كامل يعني.
But we feel all what she did for the White Helmets and for the Syrian people.
كانت تقدم كثير من المساعدات كنا نشعر فيها نحن.
She was giving a lot of help, and we felt it even if we didn't meet her.
وكنا نستطيع أن نقدم الحياة لكثير من الناس في داخل الأراضي السورية بفضل مساعدة جو.
And we, because of her help, we gave a lot of things and life to people who were in need in Syria. This is because of Jo.
أتمنى من كل الناس أن يكونوا مثل جو.
We want all the people to be like Jo.
And that's a very powerful message, and thank you for that, Munir. And I think with with that message of encouragement, just to focus for a moment on Syria in particular, the campaign obviously continued after Jo's death, and there is still so much work to do to improve the lives of people in Syria. The White Helmets do an incredible, fearless job on the ground, but the problem at root is a political one. As a parliamentarian, Ali, and as a campaigner, Nick, how is the campaign at the moment? Have we made progress since June? Is the situation getting worse? Is there more that needs to be done to persuade British and other leading European and American politicians to do more?
Certainly, Munir can speak to the situation on the ground, and I would imagine how it's gotten worse with increased Russian intervention in particular, and the change in American leadership means it's a very uncertain time for Syrians now, not knowing if the world will continue to ignore its responsibility to protect the people of Syria from being bombed and being starved on a daily basis. So it's a time of great uncertainty, I would say, and it's a time of great uncertainty when it takes that steeliness to focus on, so how can we make sure that people, stopping the bombs raining down on his colleagues, on the people that they're trying to help, on the hospitals of Aleppo, that is the concern of our leaders, not narrow, closed doors concerns about just shutting the trap doors and keeping the world out. Our interests and our hearts are bigger than that, and so we have to be taking that to the change of the guard in the UK and to in the US as well, and challenging them to see it in their interest and see it in their hearts to stop the bombs raining down on the people of Syria.
And Ali, we've obviously had a change of leadership in this country since Jo's death. There's a change of leadership here in the UK, not entirely dissimilar from the one that happened before, but a change nonetheless. We obviously have the huge changes with Brexit and now with President-elect Trump. What do you think that means as a parliamentarian, and what more needs to be done in Westminster?
Okay, so as Nick said, clearly the political situation is difficult, and just watching from the outside, I can only imagine how things are for people in Syria, and it does feel as though it's hard to see that we've made progress. However, in a situation like this, it's almost the default position to say it's too hard and too complicated and nothing can be done. But this is where we need to rely on our principles. And we have international humanitarian law for a reason, which is that after the horrors of the Second World War, the whole world came together and established principles, rights, tried to say even in times of conflict, there are principles that must not be transgressed. And it's very straightforward. Bombing a hospital is against all of those values and principles. It is very simple. Therefore, it is incumbent on the British government and governments around the world to step forward and say, here is our strategy to protect civilians. Now, there might be lots of things in that strategy: diplomacy, sanctions, the judicious use of our armed forces, a whole range of means of getting aid and support and backing to Syrian civilians who need our help. But at heart, this issue is very simple. Our values, our principles are being transgressed. Of course, there's lots of questions about what we do to resolve that, but we just have to reassert, re-emphasize that as a matter of principle, civilians have a right to be protected even in war, and that's what we need to achieve.
And Munir, I shall ask you about the situation on the ground in a moment, but you said something that really caught my attention there, Alison, where you said, people say of the situation, it is too hard, it is too difficult, it cannot be done. And those words, to any campaigner, are like a red rag to a bull. And Jo would have reacted very much to that. You know, you can't lobby the Nobel Peace Prize. She did. You know, you can't campaign on international issues in your first year of your first term. You've got to focus local. She did both. So there's definitely that sense of that energy that Jo had that needs to be transferred. And of course, nobody demonstrates that commitment and that energy on the front line quite like the White Helmets. Munir, please take a moment to tell us how the situation is at the moment and whether it's been alleviated or whether it's gotten worse since the beginning of the year.
هلا للأسف الوضع يتجه نحو الأسوأ في سوريا.
Unfortunately, it's getting worse in Syria.
وبالأخص بعد تدخل الروسي إلى جانب الأسد.
And especially after Russia first by the Assad side.
طبعا بس بدي هلا أعرض عليكم عرض بسيط هو تقرير لشهرين فقط من داخل حلب وفق توثيقات الوايت هيلمتس.
I just want to give you some a report about the records of the injured and killed people in Syria.
طبعا هدول تقريرين عن شهر أكتوبر وسبتمبر فقط.
This is only for October and September months.
للأسف كانوا الجرحى بحدود 1232 شخص.
The injured people were 1,232 people.
كان في منهم أطفال 324 طفل جريح.
Among them there were 324 injured children.
كان في منهم 294 امرأة.
And 294 women.
كان في منهم 614 رجل.
614 men.
الشهداء اللي سقطوا في حلب في شهرين أكتوبر ونوفمبر.
The people who are killed in Aleppo in October and November.
827 شهيد.
827 people.
209 من الأطفال منهم.
209 children died in Aleppo.
210 من النساء.
210 women.
408 من الرجال.
408 men.
طبعا هذه الأرقام وفق توثيقات الوايت هيلمت وعمل الوايت هيلمت داخل حلب.
So this is as the records of the white helmets in Aleppo, inside Aleppo.
طبعا وبكل أسف وبكل أسى يعني بدي أنا أذكر المناطق التي تم استهدافها حتى حصلنا على هذه النتائج الكارثية.
Unfortunately, we had these numbers from these places that I'm going to tell you about. These places were bombed.
يعني بصراحة نحن نشعر الحرب ضد الشعب.
We feel like this war is against the people.
4 مدارس تم استهدافها في هذين الشهرين.
4 schools have been bombed in 2 months.
4 مراكز دفاع مدني.
4 places for the civil defenses.
3 مشافي داخل حلب.
3 hospitals inside Aleppo.
9 أسواق شعبية.
9 shopping places.
413 منزل من منازل المدنيين.
413 houses for civilian.
فرن واحد لإنتاج الخبز. فرن خبز.
Place for producing bread.
الأهداف كانت كلها أهداف مدنية.
It was all civilian targets.
وأماكن خدمية.
And services places.
ومنازل للمدنيين.
And civilian houses.
الوضع يزداد سوءا بشكل كبير.
The situation is getting worse and worse.
ويجب علينا وعلى كافة شعوب العالم وعلى كافة سياسيين وبرلمانيين العالم.
We have as people and the whole political in the world
أن نكون قادرين على إيقاف هذا الشلال من الدم في سوريا.
We should be able to stop the bloodshed in Syria.
And what I draw from that, and I think that's a really appropriate point to end, because you paint a very dark picture of Syria, and we all see it on the news. That should be our motivator, because you tell me that, and I think it's too hard, it's too difficult, it cannot be done. That's my motivator when I go from here today. And in doing so, I think the most important thing is that we do so because there are many sides of the conflict in Syria, there are many sides of British politics and divergent views. And I think the really important thing is that when we as campaigners go out there to try and alleviate this catastrophic humanitarian situation, we do so with decency, we do so with an open mind, we do so maybe with some 4-letter words when necessary, but we do so with that respect for people, because we do have more in common than divides us. And I think if there's one thing that we can do, having listened to Nick and to Ali and to Munir this morning, if there's one thing we can do to help the people of Syria and the other causes that Jo believed in, it is to take those tenets, those characteristics with us today, to talk about the things that Jo talked about, maternal health, and particularly Darfur and Syria, to take those things, to continue to fly the flag, and moreover, to love like Jo. And with that, I'd just like to thank our panel.
Thanks.